Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi barakatuh, family. Welcome to this show. I'm your host, Preacher Mars. I hope I'm coming to you on an excellent and well relaxed Saturday for you and your family. This is kind of a nice show. Yesterday we had Make It Make Sense Friday. And one of the things I was alluding to from that broadcast was the telecast we're going to do today, which is a little bit of a kickback show, a little bit of a you remember when show, and a little bit of a reminder. So our title today, if you will, is simply putting the neighbor back in the hood. Now, when I say putting the neighbor back in the hood, let me explain what I mean. Many of us grew up in neighborhoods that had families, that had individuals that they policed our neighborhoods, but it was with the best intention because they had high expectations for us as kids, as citizens, and I think even more so, it was just where they came from. We're talking about, in some cases, old Southern neighborhoods. You know, people that came from down south, like my grandparents, and they weren't they weren't any different than everybody else. I mean, a lot of people don't know that at the turn of the 19th century, 80%, they say, 80% of African Americans lived below the Mason-Dixon line. So I think in actually catching that piece, there's this thing that I've been having now, which is what happened to the power of community. We live in a situation with media that in many regards it segments communities, if you will. So you have community arise on in the infrastructure, social media and infrastructure, the internet, superhighway. And what has happened, for lack of a better word, is that we don't understand neighbor. Like you know, I had let me give you a preview of the neighbors I had. This is a small list. I'm just gonna go with the men because all the men. I'm gonna go with the men and the women. Mr. and Mrs. Lowe, Mr. and Mrs. Pollard, Mr. and Mrs. Brown, Mr. and Mrs. Grant, Mr. and Mrs. Mr. and Mrs. Alexander, Mr. and Mrs. Austin, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong, Mr. and Mrs. Randolph, Mr. and Mrs. Sclafford, Mr. and Mrs. Grant, Mr. and Mrs. Lester, Mr. and Mrs. Wages. People, I just named a tribe of people. These were nuclear families, mother and father. I don't like the idea of intact families. That's not a woman that leads a family is, to me, she's mother and father. And God bless her. And we should also be careful about how we categorize people because sometimes we put them in this thing. I don't like that single mother thing. It's a mother. Call her what it is. She's not going to be anything else. She's a mother. She's a leader of the family. If you're going to call her a single mother, you should just say a single leader. Don't say single mother. She's a single leader. I just ran down a bunch of people that just from memory that I remember comprising a neighborhood. And the neighborhood did things that I see neighborhoods not doing as much as they used to. And that's not to say that it's gone. Okay, it's not to say that it's gone. I'm just saying that it's not being as utilized as much as it could be. Like, you know, my sis Reed calls me up, make sure I'm doing okay. Do you have this? Do you have that? She doesn't have to do that. Okay? Reed's tight with my mom. She calls my mom. She doesn't have to do that. But that extends out of a sense of what? Community. And I remember talking about what happened to old grumpy black men. And I remember something about old grumpy black men. They cared. They cared. They might yell at you, they might scream at you, they might Melvin Ryan you, but they care. And the care came from a place that sometimes we don't understand. The care comes from a place of hope. When I say the care comes from a place of hope, it means that sometimes their dreams and aspirations were cut short. Meaning racism, meaning Jim Crow, meaning segregation, meaning not being able to the schools they wanted to go to, or get the training that they needed to do to uplift themselves and their families. But they made sure that it didn't happen to you. And a lot of what we're seeing now is I'm making sure it doesn't happen to me, but we're not making sure it doesn't happen to our brothers and sisters. There's a campaign, Master War Dean Muhammad down in Houston. I think the Nation of Islam, Muhammad's Muslim before 45 does the same thing. It's called Putting the Neighbor Back in the Hood. And what I love about it, it's just a plain spoken caring thing. When I say plain spoken, it is interesting to see with nation black men in suits on the hottest days, walking up, banging on people's doors to give them the final call, but also to give them wellness checks. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Is there anything I can provide to you? Is there anything I can bring to you when I'm coming back the next time? And I think that's such a refreshing type of deal. Let me bring some shout outs on here. Sister Jasmine, she's a regular person to the show. I got something for you. A regular person, Sister Nadira, I see you've made your way back. Alhamdulillah, I got you covered too. You know, this whole thing of community has really, it's inspired me, but it troubles me. It inspires me and it troubles me. And the reason I say that because we shouldn't have to remember how community works effectively. When I say we shouldn't have to think about how community works effectively, I'm like, it's in us. It's labeled, for lack of a better word, the right thing to do, the thing you should be doing. And sometimes it's a little weird because we've moved off the track. Call it politics, geopolitics, call it racism, da-da-da. But there was a time when we dealt with racism, but we excelled irregardless. And you think about some of the great communities that we talk about, the great African kings. And here in the United States, it was just in the news, Black Wall Street. But they talk about the financial, no, Black Wall Street was a phenomenon of a cultural community. And you can't overlook that. Black Wall Street, parts of Harlem, parts of LA, parts of Chicago, they were bastions of cultural community. And I miss it in a large regard. At 53, I miss it. And sometimes I bear witness that maybe I haven't done the best job I could have done. Maybe in my mother's community, when I see the young guys running up the street and they engage in something questionable, maybe I should have stepped over there. Not as somebody to give them a lesson or scold them, just say, hey, fellas, there's another way that you could be doing those things. You know what I'm saying? The ability to engage our youth is something that has been, it's been lost. I'm going to say it's been lost. We have to have mentorship groups and things like that because the idea of the community is, it's disjointed now. And people don't understand just how valuable that was, how valuable it is. As a practicing Muslim, the Muslim community suffers the same thing. Our identifiers are not particularly identifiers of strong Muslim community. It's a community over here, a community over here, a community over here, and they're in competition to be seen as the best or the model Muslim community, but you're not communal. If you don't talk to the person over there, that person doesn't talk to you, then your viability is greatly reduced. I probably wouldn't want to be a part of your community if I can't go over to this community and engage. So yes, I'll even call out some of the old grumpy black men in the community. Mr. Smith, better known as Diddy Bop, Mr. Diddy Bop Smith, Northwest Washington. Mr. Washington that lived by my grandmother. Miss Hill, the Gibsons, Mr. Turnage across the street, Martha Turnage, Rodney Gibson, Jimmy Gibson, Martha Turnage, Peaches. Wow, that's just on one street. That's just on 7th and Kennedy between Longfellow and Kennedy Street. You begin to see the idea that the personage or the persona of community has changed over the years. And it's had some help. And it's had some help. Yes, I'm gonna get to that in a minute, JT. I'm gonna throw that right here. What happened to the neighborhood mechanic? You see what I'm talking about, people? The guy who would smoke a cigarette all day long and change your alternator. However long the job was, that's how long the cigarette lasted. A 3-hour job was one cigarette. I don't know how he got it, but when he finished, he put it out. And we laughed at those people and we rejoiced with those people. And we would see them we would see the mechanic, like we would see the guy to cut your grass, like we would see the guy to paint your house. You know, we see him at church on Sunday. That's how connected community was. And I'll be the first one to tell you, man, community does not work like that these days. And I'm not saying it can't work that way. Remember the preacher, the neighborhood preacher? The church that was down the street, you see the preacher on Sunday preaching, but on Saturday you see him cutting his grass. That type of scenario. If you ever want to watch a funny thing about community, and you had your hustlers in the community too, let's not forget them. You had the guys who try and sell you, rob you, and take your battery, steal your battery out of your car, and then trying to sell it back to you. You had the guys who were the drug dealers, they weren't that good. You had the guys that were drug addicts, they weren't that good either. But they didn't steal from the elderly, and when you saw them and they were kind of cleaned up, they would turn to the elderly and go, "Have a nice day, Miss Moss. Have a nice day, Mr. Moss." They might be strung out as hell, but they weren't crazy. What happened with that? Could it be gentrification? Could it be redlining? Could it be the way that people who've held on to their homes for 40, 50 years are now losing their homes because the tax rates are so high? Because the house here that was bought for $15,000 is beside a house that sold for $800,000, and the taxes are so high that they lose their homes. Could it be that? Or could it be a well-orchestrated plan to make sure that we're never going to have another Black Wall Street? We're never going to have another 7th and Kennedy with all the people. We're never going to have a Justina Drive with all the people, Mr. Pollard, Mr. Brown, Mr. Lowe, Mr. Grant, Mr. Alexander, Mr. Austin, that we're never going to have that again. Mr. Lester, Mr. Wages, because we're not aspiring for it. And to even go further, are we teaching our kids about community? Are we teaching our children about community? Because we're teaching about school, we're teaching about education. Are we teaching them to maintain their environment, their own ecosystem? Are we teaching about the mechanics of being entrepreneurs in your own neighborhood? Are we teaching them the mechanics about establishing real estate that we hold on to? I was at a meeting, a brothers meeting a couple years back. Not a couple years, sorry, a couple months back before COVID hit. And we were talking about, buying the building next to the masjid. And, someone said, yeah, well, these people come in and they buy, non-Black people come in, buy the property up. And a brother perked up. He said, no, he said, you can't put that on. He said, it's not that they buy our assets. He goes, we just don't know the value of our assets. And if we knew the value of our assets, we would coalesce financially and buy up our own property. Elijah Muhammad said something years ago in the framework of do for self. And I find it stunning now because I've said this before, the Nation of Islam and those early cultures really found a way to establish community in the worst of situations, meaning that it wasn't protected. The communities weren't protected, but they evolved. The communities weren't legally recognized, but they still produced a certain type of excellence. And maybe one of the things I'm talking about with the community is where and when do we get back to producing excellence? Because we're not necessarily dealing with issues of segregation and Jim Crow. We deal with police brutality, but I told you way back then they were dealing with police brutality, and there was no recourse. You just couldn't get up and jump and handle and do what you had to do. It just didn't happen. However, maybe there you go, there you go. Johnny Thomas changed the name of the community to Brewers Hill and priced people out. But that happened in Milwaukee. That happened in Milwaukee. That happened in Milwaukee. I remember that. But what about this? What if we start small? What if we find a way to find around our communities the corner store, the church, the dry cleaner, the car wash, the morgue, or not the morgue, but the funeral home, and the school? What if we got back to owning those things? Black owned, or at least community owned, because I want to reach this out to Latinos as well, Native Americans as well. What if we own those cornerstones, if you will, of our community? Because I can look down my grandmother's street and I can look straight. I'm looking down there now, and I used to be able to see the people that owned the fish store. The barber shop was right on the corner. The corner store was right there. Mr. True's dry cleaner was there, and to the right of it was Johnson and Jenkins Funeral Home. Do you see what I'm talking about? That these things are ingrained in my mind because I saw them as a child. What if we took a generation of kids and we put them in an incubator and we made sure that they saw nothing but Black financial and communal success? And he did in the Latino community too. And that's all they saw. And they grew up, and that's all they saw. That's what they saw, and that's what they excelled. That's what they aspired to. They excelled to these models. What if we did that? What if we took the drug dealer and we say, you know what? We're going to send you to school. And since you like pills so much, be a pharmacist. How many people remember the corner pharmacist? In my grandfather's neighborhood, he was Black. We don't have neighborhood pharmacists anymore. I remember Brooks Pharmacy used to have to walk through the alley, go get the prescription. This is how old it is. This is how old I am. I remember when they used to flavor mix the cough syrup. Anyway, what kind of, you want grape? And they make the cough syrup taste like grape, but they make it taste like cherry. And I think even further, we're coming out of this thing called social justice. We're coming out of this thing called the period of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. What about Black communities mattering? You ever notice that when a protest happens, we got to go downtown to protest the man? We can't be in our own communities. People don't come to us. We have something to say that's important. We have to run downtown to the establishment. What if you had 60,000 people, or like in Houston, you had 80,000 people, and they were right in Fifth Ward, or they were right in Third Ward, or in New York City, they just shut down Broadway, or in Milwaukee, they got on Wisconsin Avenue, and they just shut that thing down, or not even in Wisconsin, they stayed in North Side Milwaukee. And they didn't go downtown. And instead of saying we're going to protest, they say, listen, we're going to bring some paints and some buckets and some nails and some hammers. And you know what we're going to fix up our community. We're going to love ourselves up. And that's the one thing I do miss about the communities of old. You may get scolded. You may get told off. You may get cussed out twice. But in the middle of that, they had this thing that the community was there, the neighbor was there to love you up. We joke about certain things. When's the last time your neighbor came to your house to get a cup of flour, sugar? We don't even have that anymore. Or I remember one time, my cousin one time, I'm not saying they were broke. We were broke, but we bought some Kool-Aid as kids one time, and my cousin said he's gonna make it, and they didn't have sugar, so he used Sweet and Low, And he was like, that was what his mom used for her diabetes. I'm like, dude, I'm 7. My kidneys are good. Uh, what's my point? We bought that Kool-Aid from the corner store up in Danville, Virginia, less than a 4-minute walk from the house. And from that spot in Danville, Virginia, you can see the house, the church, the high school, the drugstore, the gas station, the middle school. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Where have you been in lately where your community, and you can call it your office community, you can call it your neighborhood, because this is about putting the neighbor back in the hood. One thing about putting the neighbor back in the hood is restoring that aspect of being able to love people up. We'll give a shout out to Brother Mikhail, man. Thank you so much for coming on, brother. Appreciate you. Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. But why are we not in the business of loving each other up? And I'm gonna bring this up, and I might be off a little bit. There was a time in the Black community when people passed away that there was a spiritual awareness that permeated throughout the whole community. And this is before you had the internet and all of that. And a person would pass away, and the communication chain was so robust that you would see people you may not have seen in 5, 6, 7 years, and they say, "Well, I heard so and so died. Just want to come, and this is the way to do. I want to come by, and pay my respects, take the hat off in your house." You see that, people? I know you're blinded by the grave, but they take the hat off in the house, and they sit and they have something to eat, and they may not make it to the funeral or the wake, and they will tell you, "I might not make it to the wake. I might not make it to the funeral." But they cared enough to let you know that they cared, and they came to check on you as a family or an individual. Is there anything you need? That's all you needed. Someone with a mindset that says, in this moment of pain, we're going to love this family up. Putting the neighbor back in the hood, brothers and sisters, is getting back to that space where we don't have to think about loving each other up. When I see my family members, I don't have to think about how am I going to give them a hug. That's out the way. When I see my nephews, I give them a hard time, but they know Uncle Preach cares. Uncle Preach loves them. And that, in and of itself, has been a situation we've been missing for a while, particularly in the Black community, because we have a propensity sometimes when we get on these drives about social justice and da-da-da, we forget the essence of who we are and how we got to a certain place. We forget the essence of why we even able to have this protest. And it comes from that space where we do understand our communities. And our communities have educated us in a way that inspires us, but also gives us courage to change in the roughest and the most difficult of situations. We may celebrate kneeling at football games, basketball games, and all that type of stuff. But I want to give a shout out to all the people in the community, seen and unseen. They didn't kneel, brothers and sisters. They stood up for us. They stood up for love. They stood up for courage. They stood up against indifference. And nobody will ever take a knee for them. They'll get no monetary rewards. There'll never be a reward for these people on GoFundMe. There's no GoFundMe page. It was just the right thing to do. And instead of laying down in the worst situations, they decided to love up. So as I close today, I want you to think about community. Think about some of the great songs about community, about people coming together, about people finding a core purpose and looking at a situation, a very educated, layered situation where they look at people and they judge people according to their community. And if a person doesn't meet a certain standard of that community, they don't condemn that person. They condemn the community. We need to be turning out better product. We need to be turning out a better grade of neighbor, a better grade of son, a better grade of daughter, a better grade of neighbor, if you will. And I encourage us all to think about those things. So the next time that we have a shooting or some weird twist of injustice, and you know it's going to happen soon, instead of us running downtown with our picket signs and our slogans, maybe for the family that lost something, we raise a little money, we bring some food by, we paint the house, we fix their steps, or we wash their car, or we wash their clothes, or we tell them, you know what, you don't go to work today. We collect a little bit of money. You stay home, get your spirit right. Maybe we need to start putting the neighbor back in the hood, because it seems like there's a whole lot of neighbors still under the hood. Preacher Moss, SOS shout out show, Saturday. Have a good time. You know why? Because Monday will be here after Sunday. God bless you. Take care. Remember, Allah is God. Keep it simple. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Put the neighbor back in the hood.